The November rain drummed against my apartment window in Brooklyn, creating rivulets that distorted the city lights below. I sat at my small kitchen table, laptop open, reviewing the month's expenses for the third time. The numbers hadn't changed since the last review, but somehow I kept hoping they would magically rearrange themselves into something more manageable. "Marcus, you coming to dinner on Saturday?" My sister Rachel's voice crackled through my phone speaker. I'd put her on speakerphone while I worked, a habit from our childhood when we'd talk for hours while doing homework. "What dinner?" I asked, clicking through another spreadsheet. My freelance graphic design work had been steady, but steady in New York meant just barely keeping my head above water. "Mom's birthday dinner, remember? We're going to Le Bernardin." My fingers froze over the keyboard. Le Bernardin. The mere mention of the 3 Michelin-starred restaurant made my stomach tighten. I'd walked past it once, peering through the windows at the elegant interior, the kind of place where a glass of water probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I don't know, Rach. Things are pretty tight right now." There was a pause on the other end. I could picture her in her Upper East Side apartment, probably sitting on her white leather couch, the one that cost more than 3 months of my rent. Rachel had married well, Thomas Whitfield III, heir to a pharmaceutical fortune. Their wedding at the plaza had been featured in the Times. "Marcus, it's Mom's 60th. You have to be there." I know. It's just..." I trailed off, staring at my bank balance on the screen. After rent, utilities, and the minimum payment on my student loans, I had exactly $247 to last me another 2 weeks. A dinner at Le Bernardin would obliterate that, and then some. "Just what?" Her tone had shifted, taking on that edge I knew too well. Rachel and I had grown up in the same small apartment in Queens, but somewhere along the way, our paths had diverged so dramatically it was like we'd lived different childhoods. "Nothing. I'll figure it out." "Good." Tom's assistant made the reservation for 8 o'clock. Don't be late. After she hung up, I sat in the silence of my apartment, listening to the rain and the distant sound of sirens. The framed photo on my desk caught my eye. Mom, Rachel, and me at Coney Island, all 3 of us grinning with ice cream cones in hand. That was 20 years ago, before Dad left. Before Mom worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. Before Rachel decided she'd never be poor again, and I decided I'd never sell my soul for money. I opened my laptop again and searched Le Bernardin menu prices. The page loaded slowly, and when the numbers appeared, I actually laughed. The tasting menu was $395 per person. Wine pairings added another $295. With tax and tip, one meal would cost me nearly $1,000. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Can't wait to see you Saturday, honey. It's been too long." That settled it. I'd figure something out. I always did. The next 3 days passed in a blur of work. I took on every project I could find: logo designs, website mock-ups, even a flyer for a local dog walker that paid a whopping $50. By Friday night, I'd managed to scrape together an extra $400, bringing my total to just under $650. It would have to be enough. I'd skip the wine, maybe say I was on antibiotics. I'd eaten ramen for dinner every night this week. I could handle one night of careful ordering. Saturday arrived gray and cold, with that bitter wind that cuts through even the thickest coat. I stood in front of my closet, surveying my options. My best suit was 5 years old, bought for a job interview at an agency that didn't hire me. The pants were a little tight now, and there was a small stain on the jacket I hoped no one would notice in dim lighting. I took the subway to Midtown, watching the city transform as we moved from Brooklyn through Manhattan. The buildings grew taller, the people better dressed, the very air seeming to shimmer with wealth and possibility. By the time I emerged at 51st Street, I felt like I'd traveled to a different planet. Le Bernardin occupied the ground floor of a gleaming office building, its entrance understated in that way only the truly expensive places could afford to be. No need for flash when everyone who mattered already knew what you were. I was 20 minutes early, so I walked around the block twice, partly to calm my nerves and partly to delay the inevitable. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "We're here, table in the back." Taking a deep breath, I pulled open the heavy glass door and stepped inside. The maître d' looked up from his podium, his eyes doing that quick scan I'd grown accustomed to, taking in my off-the-rack suit, my scuffed shoes, the nervous way I cleared my throat. "Good evening, sir. Do you have a reservation?" "Yes, I'm with the Whitfield party." His expression shifted slightly, a microscopic adjustment that somehow managed to convey both acknowledgement and dismissal. "Right this way." The dining room was everything I'd imagined and more. Soft lighting emanated from geometric fixtures, casting a warm glow over tables dressed in crisp white linens. The soft clink of crystal and silver created a symphony of refinement. Conversations were muted, as if even the voices here were required to dress appropriately. I spotted them immediately. Mom sat at a round table near the back, looking radiant in a navy dress I'd never seen before, clearly a gift from Rachel. My sister sat to her right, diamonds glittering at her ears and throat, while Thomas held court to Mom's left, gesturing with his hands as he told some story that had both women smiling. Marcus! Mom's face lit up when she saw me, and for a moment, all my anxiety melted away. She stood, and I hurried over to embrace her, breathing in her familiar scent of lavender and vanilla. Happy birthday, Mom! I pulled out the small wrapped box I'd been carrying in my coat pocket. Inside was a vintage brooch I'd found at a thrift shop in Williamsburg, Art Deco, with tiny sapphires that matched her eyes. It had cost me $80 I couldn't really spare, but the way her face softened when she opened it made it worth every penny. Oh, honey, it's beautiful. She pinned it immediately to her dress, and I caught Rachel rolling her eyes. How vintage, my sister murmured, in a tone that made the word sound like an insult. I took my seat, noticing the fourth place setting had already been used. Did someone leave? Oh, that was Aunt Caroline, Mom explained. She had to catch an early flight back to Boston. Thomas signaled the waiter with the kind of casual authority that came from a lifetime of being served. We should order. I've taken the liberty of selecting the wine, a 2015 Chassagne Montrachet that pairs beautifully with the seafood. My heart sank as I watched him pour from a bottle that probably cost more than my monthly subway pass. I opened the menu, trying to look casual as my eyes searched desperately for the least expensive option. Even the appetizers started at $45. So, Marcus, Thomas said, settling back in his chair with the satisfied air of someone who'd never worried about a bill in his life. How's the freelance work going? Still doing those, what do you call them? Logo designs? Graphic design, I corrected quietly. And it's going well. I just finished a campaign for a sustainable fashion startup. Sustainable fashion? Rachel laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. Is that what they're calling thrift stores now? Rachel, Mom said softly, but my sister was already on a roll. I'm just saying, Marcus, you have so much talent. Remember when you won that art competition in high school? Everyone said you'd be the next big thing. And now, she gestured vaguely at my suit, letting the implication hang in the air like smoke. I'm happy with what I do, I said, though the words felt thick in my throat. Happy doesn't pay rent, Thomas chimed in, swirling his wine. You know, I have connections at several agencies, real firms with benefits and stability. I could make a call. I appreciate it, but I'm good. The waiter appeared at my elbow, pad at the ready. Have we decided? Thomas ordered first, the chef's tasting menu. Of course. Rachel followed suit. Mom, bless her, tried to order just an appetizer and salad, but Rachel wouldn't hear of it. It's your birthday, Mom. You have to have the full experience. All eyes turned to me. The waiter's pen hovered over his pad, waiting. I could feel sweat gathering at the back of my neck. I'll have the... I scanned the menu one more time, doing rapid calculations. The roasted chicken. We don't serve chicken, sir, the waiter said apologetically. We specialize in seafood. My face burned. Of course they didn't serve chicken. This was Le Bernardin, not some corner bistro. Right. Of course. I'll have the... I pointed at the first thing I saw under $100. The langoustine. Excellent choice. And for your second course? Second course. Of course there would be multiple courses. This was the kind of place where dinner was a marathon, not a sprint. Just the langoustine is fine. Rachel's laugh tinkled across the table. Just one course? Marcus, don't be ridiculous. He'll have the tasting menu too, she told the waiter. No, really, I'm not that hungry. Don't be silly. She waved her hand dismissively, diamonds catching the light. It's a celebration. Besides, she added, lowering her voice just enough that Mom might not hear, but loud enough that I definitely would. We all know you can't afford this place anyway. Thomas is treating. The words hit me like a physical blow. I saw Mom's face fall slightly, saw Thomas's small smirk, saw the waiter's carefully neutral expression that somehow made it all worse. I can pay for my own meal, I said quietly. Rachel's perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched. Really? Because last I heard you were 2 months behind on rent and borrowing money from Mom for groceries. That was 6 months ago, and I paid her back. Ladies, Thomas interjected smoothly, perhaps we could discuss this later? We're making a scene. I looked around. We weren't making a scene. The other diners were far too well-bred to stare, but there was a quality to the air around our table, a tension that seemed to ripple outward like circles in water. You know what? I stood up, placing my napkin carefully on the table. I need to use the restroom. Please, order whatever you think is best. I walked through the dining room with as much dignity as I could muster, feeling every eye that wasn't quite looking at me. The restroom was a sanctuary of marble and soft jazz, and I stood at the sink, gripping the edges and trying to breathe. How had it come to this? How had Rachel and I, who used to share everything, who used to protect each other from the chaos of our childhood, become these people who could barely share a meal without drawing blood? I splashed cold water on my face, careful not to spot my suit. In the mirror, I saw my father's eyes looking back at me. The same dark brown, the same slight downturn at the corners that made me look sad even when I wasn't. He'd been an artist, too. A painter who'd spent more time chasing inspiration than paychecks. The last time I'd seen him, he'd been living in a studio apartment in Portland, canvases stacked against every wall, surviving on commissions and the kindness of strangers. "You've got the gift," he'd told me. "Don't let anyone convince you it's not enough." But standing here in this temple to excess, wearing a suit that announced my failure with every wrinkle, I wondered if maybe Rachel was right. Maybe happiness wasn't enough. Maybe talent wasn't enough. Maybe I wasn't enough. I stayed in the restroom longer than necessary, checking my phone, pretending to have urgent emails that required immediate attention. When I finally emerged, I nearly collided with someone coming around the corner. "Pardon me," I said automatically, then stopped. The man in chef's whites looked at me with surprise, then something else. Recognition? He was in his 50s, with silver at his temples and the kind of presence that commanded attention even in a simple corridor encounter. "Marcus," he said, and my heart stopped. "Marcus Chen?" I stared at him, trying to place the face. How did he know my name? "I'm sorry. Do we?" "Eric Reipert," he said, extending his hand. "We met years ago. You probably don't remember. You were just a kid, maybe 16. You came to a cooking demonstration I did at the Culinary Institute. You asked the most insightful questions about the relationship between visual presentation and flavor perception. I've never forgotten it." The memory rushed back. A school field trip. My art teacher thought it would be good for us to see how food could be art. I'd been fascinated, had stayed after to pepper the famous chef with questions while my classmates rushed for the bus. Yes, I remember. I can't believe you remember me." He smiled, and it transformed his serious face. "I remember talent and passion. You were going to be an artist, weren't you? How did that turn out?" "I am an artist," I said, with more conviction than I'd felt all evening. "Graphic design, mostly. I have my own freelance business." "That's wonderful. Are you dining with us tonight?" "Yes, my family's here for my mother's birthday." "Ah, which table?" I told him, and he nodded thoughtfully. "Well, I should let you get back. But Marcus..." He paused, studying me with those intense chef's eyes that seemed to see through to the bone. "Don't let anyone tell you that choosing passion over security is wrong. The world needs people who create beauty, in whatever form it takes." He disappeared through a door marked "Staff Only," leaving me standing in the hallway, feeling like I'd just been blessed by some culinary saint. When I returned to the table, the first courses had arrived. My langoustine sat before my empty chair, arranged like a piece of art on the pristine white plate. The conversation stopped as I sat down. "Everything all right?" Mom asked, concern creasing her forehead. "Everything's fine," I said, picking up my fork. The langoustine was perfect, sweet and tender, with a sauce that tasted like the ocean had been distilled into pure flavor. "So," Rachel said, clearly ready to resume her interrogation, "have you given any more thought to getting a real job?" But before I could answer, a server appeared with an additional plate, setting it carefully before me. "Compliments of the chef," she said with a smile. I stared at the dish. Some kind of delicate fish I couldn't identify, surrounded by microgreens and drops of sauce that looked like tiny planets on the white porcelain universe. "There must be some mistake," Thomas said. "We didn't order." "No mistake, sir. Chef Reipert wanted Mr. Chen to have this. It's his special creation for the evening, not on the regular menu." The table fell silent. Rachel's mouth actually dropped open slightly, a crack in her perfect facade. Thomas looked like someone had just told him his portfolio had lost half its value. Mom beamed with pride, though I could tell she was as confused as everyone else. "You know Eric Reipert?" Rachel finally managed. I took a bite of the fish, letting the flavors bloom across my tongue before answering. "We met years ago. I didn't think he'd remember me." "But how? When? Why didn't you ever mention this?" I shrugged, enjoying the moment more than I probably should have. It never came up. The rest of the dinner proceeded differently. Rachel's barbs lost their sting. Thomas's condescension felt more like background noise. More dishes appeared at our table. A soup that wasn't on the menu, a dessert that the server described as chef's new experiment. He'd love your feedback. Each time the servers treated me with a deference that clearly baffled my sister and her husband. As we were finishing our meal, the dining room suddenly hushed. Eric Reipert himself had emerged from the kitchen, something that apparently didn't happen often, judging by the way other diners craned their necks to watch. He moved through the room with purpose, stopping briefly at a few tables, And then he was at ours. Mrs. Chen? He addressed my mother directly. I wanted to wish you a happy birthday personally. Your son made quite an impression on me years ago. It's wonderful to see him again. Mom glowed under the attention, and I saw her sit up straighter, the woman who'd worked 3 jobs to keep us fed suddenly looking like she belonged in this glittering room. Marcus, Chef Rapert turned to me. I hope you enjoyed the dishes. That last one, the dessert. I remembered you asking about the visual impact of food, how the eye eats first. I'd love to know what you thought. We talked for a few minutes about the presentation, the way he'd used color and negative space on the plate, how texture created visual interest that translated to the palate. I forgot about Rachel and Thomas, forgot about the prices and my empty bank account, forgot everything except the joy of talking to someone who understood that creation was its own reward. You should come by the kitchen sometime, he said as he prepared to leave. I'd love to show you what we're working on for next season. Maybe you could give us some input on the visual side. We're thinking of redesigning our menu presentation. I'd be honored, I managed. After he left, after the bill came and Thomas paid it with a black credit card that probably had no limit, after the awkward goodbyes and promises to do this again soon, I stood on the sidewalk outside Le Bernardin, breathing in the cold November air. That was quite a performance, Rachel said, pulling on her cashmere coat. Though I don't know why you didn't mention your connection. Could have saved us all some embarrassment. There was no performance, I said quietly, and the only person who seemed embarrassed was you. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. Thomas was already hailing a cab, eager to escape the discomfort of the evening. Mom stood between us, looking tired and smaller than she had inside. I'm proud of both my children, she said firmly. Rachel, you've built a beautiful life. Marcus, you've stayed true to yourself. Both are achievements. She kissed us both goodbye and let Thomas help her into the waiting cab. They'd drop her off in Queens on their way back to the Upper East Side. Rachel and I stood alone on the sidewalk, the space between us feeling like miles despite the mere feet. I don't understand you, she said finally. You could have so much more. Why do you insist on struggling? Because it's my struggle, I said. My choice. My life. And tonight, for the first time in a long time, I remembered why that matters. She shook her head, but something in her expression had softened. That really was Eric Reipert, wasn't it? The actual chef, not some sous chef or manager? Yeah, it really was. And he really remembered you from one meeting when you were 16. Apparently so. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I ordered the langoustine before you got there. Told the waiter to bring it when you ordered, whatever you ordered. I was going to pay for it secretly. Make sure you had at least one nice dish. She laughed, but it was brittle. Turns out you didn't need my help after all. Before I could respond, she was climbing into her own cab, disappearing into the river of taillights flowing uptown. I walked to the subway. No money left for a taxi, even if I'd wanted one. But I didn't mind. The city felt different tonight, full of possibility instead of pressure. In my pocket, my phone buzzed with an email. A potential client reaching out about a major rebranding project. The budget they mentioned was more than I'd made in the last 3 months combined. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was karma. Maybe Chef Reipert had nothing to do with it at all. But as I descended into the subway station, I thought about what he'd said about choosing passion over security, about creating beauty in whatever form it takes. The train pulled up, nearly empty at this late hour. I found a seat and pulled out my sketchbook, the one I always carried but rarely used anymore, too busy with commercial work to draw for pleasure. As we rattled through the tunnels toward Brooklyn, I began to sketch the dishes from tonight, trying to capture not just their appearance but the feeling they'd evoked. The way the sauce had pooled like watercolors, the architecture of the langoustine, proud and delicate at once. By the time I reached my stop, I'd filled 3 pages. My hand was cramping and my eyes were tired, but I felt more alive than I had in months. Tomorrow, I'd go back to logos and websites and paying the bills, but tonight, I'd remembered who I was beneath the worry and the want. I climbed the stairs to my apartment, noting that the lock still stuck and the hallway still smelled like old carpet and someone's cooking. But it didn't feel like failure anymore. It felt like choice. My choice. Inside, I pinned the sketches to the wall above my desk, next to the photo of Mom, Rachel, and me at Coney Island. 3 different people, 3 different paths, all starting from the same place. Maybe that was the real gift of the evening. Not the recognition from a famous chef or the vindication in front of my sister, but the reminder that there were many ways to define success. I opened my laptop and began working on the proposal for the new client, incorporating some of the ideas that had come to me on the train. Art meeting commerce, passion meeting pragmatism. It didn't have to be either or. It could be both and. Outside, the rain had stopped, and through my small window, I could see stars fighting their way through the city's glow. Somewhere across the river, Rachel was probably getting ready for bed in her perfect apartment, maybe telling Thomas about her strange brother who knew famous chefs and still chose to live like a student. Somewhere in Queens, Mom was probably looking at her birthday brooch, remembering when we were all young and poor and happy. And here in Brooklyn, I was exactly where I needed to be. Not because I couldn't afford better, but because this was where I did my best work. This was where I stayed hungry, in all the ways that mattered. My phone buzzed one more time. A text from an unknown number. Marcus, Eric Reipert here. Got your number from the reservation system. Hope you don't mind. I was serious about the menu consultation. My assistant will reach out Monday to schedule. Looking forward to collaborating. ER. I smiled, saved the number, and got back to work. There were designs to create, beauty to chase, bills to pay, and dreams to keep alive. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight had reminded me that I was equal to them. The city hummed outside my window, and I hummed along with it, sketching and planning until the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn. This was my New York, my life, my choice, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like more than enough. It felt like everything. Monday arrived with unseasonable warmth, one of those late November days that made New Yorkers shed their coats and remember why they fell in love with the city in the first place. I was halfway through my third cup of coffee, fine-tuning a logo design for a Brooklyn brewery, when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice that greeted me was crisp and professional. Mr. Chen, this is Sylvie Durand, Chef Reipert's assistant. He asked me to contact you regarding a potential collaboration. I set down my coffee so quickly it sloshed onto my desk, narrowly missing my keyboard. Yes, of course. Thank you for calling. Chef would like to meet with you this Thursday at 2 p.m. if you're available. He has a break between lunch service and dinner prep. Thursday works perfectly, I said, already mentally rearranging my deadline schedule. Excellent. Please come to the staff entrance on 51st Street. I'll have your name at security. Oh, and Chef mentioned you should bring your portfolio, both digital and any physical pieces you'd like to share. After she hung up, I sat staring at my phone, wondering if Saturday night had been real or some elaborate stress dream. But no, I had the sketches pinned to my wall, the text from Eric Reipert saved in my phone, and now this appointment that would take me back to Le Bernardin in an entirely different capacity. I spent the next 3 days in a creative frenzy. Beyond my regular client work, I dove into researching menu design, food photography, restaurant branding. I studied Le Bernardin's current materials, noting the elegant simplicity, the way they conveyed luxury without ostentation. I sketched concepts, playing with typography and negative space, thinking about how to translate the experience of eating there into visual form. Wednesday night, I called Mom. I have a meeting tomorrow with Eric Reipert. He wants to talk about redesigning some materials for the restaurant. Oh, honey, that's wonderful. I could hear her smile through the phone. I knew something good would come from that dinner. Even if Rachel was being, well, Rachel, have you talked to her since Saturday? Mom sighed. Briefly. She called to apologize for the awkwardness, as she put it. I told her the only awkward thing was how she treated you. Mom, you didn't have to. Yes, I did. You're both my children, and I love you equally. But love doesn't mean I have to pretend I don't see what's happening. Rachel has forgotten where she came from. Maybe this will remind her. After we hung up, I returned to my preparations. But Mom's words lingered. Rachel had forgotten where she came from. Had I held on too tightly to it? Was there a middle ground neither of us had found? Thursday arrived crisp and bright. I dressed carefully, not in my old suit this time, but in dark jeans, a black turtleneck, and a blazer I'd bought from a vintage shop in Williamsburg. Creative, professional, not trying too hard. I packed my portfolio in a leather case I'd splurged on 2 years ago and rarely used, added my laptop bag, and headed for Midtown. The staff entrance to Le Bernardin was a different world from the front door. Here, the glamour gave way to function. Rubber mats, the smell of fresh ingredients, the controlled chaos of one of the world's best kitchens preparing for service. A security guard checked my name on a list and directed me to wait in a small office off the main corridor. Sylvie appeared exactly at 2 p.m., a whirlwind of efficiency in Chef's whites and sensible shoes. Mr. Chen, lovely to meet you. Chef is just finishing up a vendor meeting. Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee? Water would be great, thank you. She returned with a glass and a smile. He's quite excited about this meeting. It's rare for him to bring in outside consultants, but he was very impressed with your insights on Saturday. Before I could respond, Eric Reipert appeared in the doorway. He wore chef's whites and an apron, looking every inch the commander of his culinary empire, but his smile was warm and welcoming. Marcus, thank you for coming. Please, let's go to my office where we can talk properly. His office was a surprise. Smaller than I'd expected, dominated by cookbooks, awards, and photographs. But what caught my eye were the framed menus on the wall, dating back decades, showing the evolution of the restaurant's visual identity. "You're admiring our history," he said, following my gaze. "That's exactly why I wanted to talk to you. We're approaching our next evolution, and I believe fresh eyes could help us see possibilities we might be missing." He gestured for me to sit and took his place behind a desk that looked more functional than decorative. "Tell me about your work." For the next hour, I showed him my portfolio: logos for startups, branding packages for small businesses, web designs for nonprofits. Nothing as prestigious as Le Bernardin, but each piece had a story, a problem solved, a vision realized. He studied everything carefully, asking questions about my process, my inspirations, the choices I'd made. "This one," he said, pointing to a rebrand I'd done for a Sunset Park restaurant. "Tell me about this." The owner wanted something that honored her grandmother's recipes while appealing to a younger demographic. I used traditional Mexican tile patterns but rendered them in a contemporary color palette. The typography is custom. I based it on her grandmother's handwriting from old recipe cards. He nodded thoughtfully. "You understand that food is about story, not just sustenance. That's what I saw in you all those years ago. You asked about meaning, not just technique." He stood and moved to a filing cabinet, pulling out several folders. "Here's what we're facing. Our current menu design has served us well, but as we move into our next chapter, I want something that reflects where we're going, not just where we've been." The current menus were beautiful: heavy cardstock, elegant typography, restrained use of color. But as he talked about his vision for the restaurant's future, I began to see what he meant. They were safe, traditional, exactly what you'd expect from a restaurant of this caliber. "What if," I said slowly, an idea forming, "we thought about the menu as an experience in itself, not just a list of dishes, but a journey, something that prepares diners for what they're about to experience?" "Go on." I pulled out my sketchbook and began drawing. "Your food is about revelation, taking familiar ingredients and showing them in new ways. What if the menu did the same? Maybe it unfolds in unexpected ways, or uses materials that surprise. Not gimmicky, but thoughtful. Like, do you know origami?" His eyes lit up. "The Japanese paper folding." "Yes, of course. There's a concept in origami called kami, which means both paper and spirit. The fold reveals what was always possible in the flat sheet. Your cooking does something similar. It reveals possibilities and ingredients that were always there, waiting." I sketched quickly, showing how a menu might unfold in stages, each revelation preparing the diner for the next course. It could be subtle. The paper weight and texture would still convey luxury, but the interaction would create anticipation. "This is exactly why I wanted to talk to you," he said, leaning forward. "You think beyond the surface. Would you be interested in developing this concept further? Paid, of course. We'd want to see mock-ups, work with our printer on feasibility, test with staff, and select guests." "I'd be honored," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Good. Sylvie will send over the formal agreement and timeline. I'd like to have prototypes within 6 weeks. We're planning our spring menu launch, and this could be part of it." He stood, and I gathered my materials, trying to process what had just happened. As we walked back through the kitchen, he stopped several times to check on preparations, taste sauces, adjust presentations. Watching him work, I understood something new about perfectionism. It wasn't about impressing others, but about meeting your own standards, pushing yourself to find what was possible. "One more thing," he said as we reached the exit. "Your sister made a reservation for next Tuesday. Party of 2, 7:30. I tried to hide my surprise. Rachel returning to Le Bernardin so soon after Saturday's drama seemed unlikely. He smiled at my expression. "I thought you should know. Family is complicated, yes? But sometimes complicated is just another word for interesting." Outside, the afternoon sun was beginning to slant between buildings, turning the city golden. I walked slowly back to the subway, portfolio in hand, mind spinning with possibilities. The fee Sylvie had mentioned in her follow-up email was more than I'd make in 2 months of regular work. It would mean I could pay off my credit cards, get ahead on rent, maybe even save something. But more than the money, it was the validation. Someone had seen my work, my vision, and found it worthy of one of the world's great restaurants. Not because of connections or charity, but because of talent and perspective. I was so lost in thought that I almost missed the text from Rachel. "Can we talk? Coffee tomorrow?" I stared at the message, remembering Mom's words. Rachel had forgotten where she came from. But maybe, just maybe, she was starting to remember. "Sure," I texted back. "Where and when?" "That place in Astoria we used to go to? 10 a.m.? The coffee shop she mentioned was in our old neighborhood, a Greek place that had been there since we were kids. We'd done homework at the corner table, sharing a single cup of coffee and a piece of baklava because that's all we could afford. The fact that she suggested it felt significant. That evening, I began sketching in earnest. The origami concept had possibilities, but it needed refinement. I researched paper types, folding techniques, the psychology of tactile experiences. I thought about the diner's journey from the moment they received the menu to the final course. How could paper and fold tell that story? By 3 a.m., my desk was covered with paper prototypes. Some were disasters. Too complicated, too precious, trying too hard. But a few felt right. Simple folds that revealed beautifully, creating a sense of discovery without overwhelming the content. I finally fell asleep on my couch, surrounded by paper and possibility. The next morning came too soon. I dressed carefully again, casual but put together, and made my way to Astoria. The old neighborhood looked different in the morning light. Gentrification had crept in, a yoga studio where the bodega used to be, an artisanal cheese shop next to the Dominican restaurant that had been there forever. But the bones were the same. The streets that had shaped us still recognizable beneath the updates. Rachel was already there when I arrived, sitting at our old table by the window. She looked different out of her Upper East Side armor, hair in a ponytail, wearing jeans and a Columbia sweatshirt I remembered from her law school days. "You came," she said as I sat down. "You asked." The waiter brought coffee without being asked. Some things hadn't changed. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of Saturday night between us. "I owe you an apology," she said finally. "Several, actually. But let's start with Saturday. Rach, no, let me say this." She wrapped her hands around her mug, a gesture I remembered from when we were young. I was horrible. Not just Saturday, but for years now. I've been so focused on never being poor again that I forgot that being poor wasn't the worst thing that happened to us. Being cruel to each other. That's worse. I studied her face, looking for the girl who used to split her lunch with me when I forgot mine, who'd taught me to tie my shoes using her own as examples. "What brought this on?" I asked. She laughed, but it was shaky. "Would you believe me if I said it was the langoustine?" I raised an eyebrow. "I'm serious. When Chef Rippert came to our table, when he talked to you about art and beauty and creation, I realized I haven't had a conversation like that in years. Everything in my world is about acquisition, status, maintaining position. And there you were, talking about negative space and texture like they were the most important things in the world. And for those few minutes, they were." She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo. I went home and looked through old pictures. Found this. It was us, maybe 10 and 12, standing in front of a mural I'd painted on the side of our building. The landlord had given me permission after I'd shown him sketches, and I'd spent a whole summer creating an underwater scene that transformed the brick wall into an aquarium. Rachel had been my assistant, mixing paints, holding brushes, defending me when older kids tried to tag over my work. "That mural stayed up for 3 years," she said, "until they tore down the building. Do you remember what you said when we watched them demolish it?" I shook my head. "You said, 'It's okay. We got to see it swimming for a while.' Like the destruction was just part of the art." She wiped at her eyes. "I couldn't understand how you could be so calm about losing something beautiful. Now I realize you knew you could create more beauty. I've been so terrified of losing what I have that I've stopped creating anything." "You created a life," I said. "Security. That's not nothing." "It's not enough," she said quietly. "Tom and we're getting divorced." The words hung between us like a physical presence. I reached across the table and took her hand, feeling the absence of her wedding rings. "I'm sorry. Don't be. It's been coming for a while. We're perfect on paper. Right schools, right families, right zip codes. But paper doesn't keep you warm at night." She squeezed my hand. "I've been jealous of you. Insanely, irrationally jealous. You have something I sold away. The ability to choose passion over safety." "You can choose again," I said. "That's what choice means. You get to keep choosing." We talked for 2 more hours, ordered breakfast, split a piece of baklava for old time's sake. She told me about the mediation proceedings, how civilized and cold they were. I told her about the Le Berner Dam project, the origami menus, the possibility opening before me. "I want to see them when they're done," she said. "The menus. I want to come to the launch." "You have a reservation Tuesday." She looked surprised. "How did you— Chef Rippert told you?" I nodded. "I wanted to come back, to apologize to him too, for making a scene in his restaurant. And," she hesitated, "I wanted to bring someone." "Oh?" "My therapist, Dr. Kim. She's been helping me work through things, and I wanted her to see the place where I realized how far off track I'd gotten." "Is that weird?" "A little," I admitted, and we both laughed. "But weird in a good way." As we prepared to leave, she pulled out an envelope. One more thing. This is yours. Inside was a check for $50,000. Rachel, no. It's from my settlement. Tom's buying me out of the apartment, and I want to invest in something real. Your business, your art, no strings, no judgment, just faith. I can't. You can. You will. Because you're going to create beautiful things, and I'm going to remember how to appreciate them. Deal? I looked at the check, at my sister, at the coffee shop where we'd learned to dream despite having nothing, maybe because we had nothing. Deal, I said. We hugged on the sidewalk. A real hug, not the air-kissed society embrace she'd perfected. She still smelled like the vanilla perfume she'd worn since high school, underneath the expensive fragrances. I'll see you at the launch, she said. Make something that makes people stop and think. Make something that would have amazed those kids we used to be. I watched her walk away, heading for the subway instead of hailing a cab. Small steps back to who she used to be, or forward to who she might become. Back in my apartment, I looked at the check again, then at my wall of sketches and prototypes. $50,000. Enough to upgrade equipment, rent a proper studio, maybe even hire an assistant. Enough to take risks, to fail without losing everything, to create without the constant pressure of survival. I pinned the check next to the Coney Island photo and got back to work. There were menus to design, beauty to create, promises to keep. But first I called Mom. Rachel came to see me, I said when she answered. I know, she called me after. My children finding their way back to each other. Best birthday gift I could have gotten. Mom, she gave me. I know that too. Use it well. Make something that honors both of who you are and where you came from. After we hung up, I turned back to my desk. The afternoon light was perfect, streaming through my small window and illuminating the paper samples scattered across every surface. I picked up a sheet of Japanese paper, thin but strong, and began to fold. The first fold was for memory. Rachel and me in matching second-hand coats, walking to school through Queens streets. The second fold was for struggle. Mom working 3 jobs, coming home exhausted but still asking about our homework. The third fold was for choice. The moment I decided to be an artist, despite everything that said I shouldn't. Each fold revealed something new, transformed the flat sheet into something dimensional, something with depth and shadow and possibility, like Chef Reipert's food, like the life I was building, like the relationship with my sister, creased and worn but not torn. Not yet. By evening, I had a prototype I was proud of, simple enough to be elegant, complex enough to create wonder, a menu that told a story not just of food, but of transformation, of taking what you're given and folding it into something new. I photographed it carefully, wrote up my proposal, prepared my presentation. In 6 weeks, some of New York's most discerning diners would hold something I created, would experience a meal through my vision. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, but that was tomorrow's concern. Tonight, I had paper and possibility, a sister who remembered how to be a sister, and a check that meant I could keep creating without drowning. I worked until the city grew quiet around me, until the only sounds were distant sirens and the whisper of paper against paper. Somewhere across the river, Rachel was probably packing up her life, preparing for whatever came next. Somewhere in Queens, Mom was probably watching her shows, wearing her birthday brooch, proud of children who were finding their way. And here in Brooklyn, I was folding paper into flowers, into birds, into dreams made tangible. Each fold a choice, each crease a commitment to the next transformation. The menus would be beautiful. I would make sure of it. Not because they needed to be, but because I needed them to be. Because sometimes the only way to honor where you've been is to pour everything into where you're going. I made one last fold and set the prototype on my desk, where the morning light would find it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new possibilities, new ways to choose passion over safety. But tonight, I was exactly where I needed to be, surrounded by paper and potential, creating something from nothing, proving that beauty and struggle weren't opposites, but partners in the dance of making meaning from material. The city hummed its nighttime song, and I hummed along, folding my way toward whatever came next. Tentar novamente. 6 weeks passed in a blur of paper and possibility. My small apartment had transformed into a design studio, with samples covering every surface, prototypes hanging from makeshift lines stretched across the room, and my desk buried under vendor catalogs and printing specifications. The check from Rachel had cleared, and I'd use some of it to upgrade my computer, buy proper design software, and invest in materials for testing. The final prototype had evolved from my initial origami concept into something more refined. The menu would arrive as an elegant envelope, The paper textured like linen but with a subtle shimmer when it caught the light. Inside, nested folders would reveal themselves as the diner progressed through the meal, each course hidden until its moment, creating anticipation and discovery. The typography was clean but warm, and I'd worked with a calligrapher to create custom flourishes that echoed the movement of Rippert's plating. "It's perfect," Sylvie had said at our final review meeting. "Chef is thrilled. The launch is set for next Thursday. We're doing a special tasting for press and VIP guests. You'll be there, of course." Now, standing in my apartment the morning of the launch, I tried to calm my nerves. The invitation had said, "cocktail attire," which sent me into another spiral of anxiety until I'd used some of Rachel's money to buy a proper suit. Not designer, but well-cut and contemporary. Looking in the mirror, I almost didn't recognize myself. Not because of the clothes, but because of the confidence that had somehow crept in over the past weeks. My phone buzzed with texts. "Mom, so proud of you, honey. Dad would be too. Rachel, break a leg tonight, wearing my lucky earrings for you." And surprisingly, one from an unknown number. "Looking forward to seeing your work in person. Thomas." The last one threw me. Thomas and Rachel's divorce had been finalized just last week, but apparently he was still on the guest list. I wondered if Rachel knew. The afternoon crawled by. I tried to work on other projects but couldn't focus. Finally, at 5 p.m., I gave up and started getting ready. The launch was at 7:30, but I wanted to arrive early to see the menus in their natural habitat, make sure everything was perfect. I arrived at Le Bernardin at 6:45 to find controlled chaos. Servers were doing final prep, the kitchen was in full swing, and Sylvie was orchestrating everything with the precision of a conductor. "Marcus, perfect timing. Come see." She led me to a side room where boxes of menus were waiting. Seeing them professionally printed, stacked, and ready made everything suddenly real. I picked one up, ran my fingers over the paper, checked the folds. Everything was as I'd designed it, but somehow more substantial, more legitimate. "They're beautiful." Eric Rippert's voice came from behind me. He was already in his chef's whites, ready for service. "The printing company said they have never done anything quite like this. They want to feature it in their trade magazine. Thank you for trusting me with this," I said. "Thank you for seeing what we couldn't. Now let me show you something." He led me into the dining room, which had been transformed for the evening. Soft lighting highlighted each table, where the new menus were already placed. But what caught my eye were the displays along the walls, enlarged photographs of my design process, sketches and prototypes showing the evolution of the concept. "Sylvie's idea," he said. "She thought people should see the artistry behind the object. We're calling tonight the intersection of culinary and visual arts." I stood there, speechless, looking at my work displayed in one of the world's great restaurants. 6 weeks ago, I'd been wondering how to pay for dinner here. Now my creative process was literally on the walls. Guests began arriving at 7:15. I positioned myself near the entrance, not sure what my role was supposed to be. Sylvie had introduced me to the staff as the artist behind our new menu design, which felt surreal every time I heard it. The first familiar face I saw was Mom's, escorted by Rachel. They'd come together, both dressed elegantly but not ostentatiously. Mom wore her birthday brooch, pinned to a simple black dress. "Oh, honey," she breathed, looking around at the displays. "This is incredible." Rachel hugged me tightly. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "So proud." They were seated at a prime table, and I watched as they received their menus. The joy on their faces as they discovered how the design worked, the way other diners leaned over to see what they were looking at. It was everything I'd hoped for. The room filled quickly with food critics, restaurant industry professionals, and what Sylvie called influencers, though they all looked impossibly young and perfectly put together. I tried to blend into the background, but Sylvie kept introducing me to people whose names I recognized from food magazines and websites. "The design is ingenious," one critic told me. "It makes the meal feel like a narrative, not just a list of dishes." I was basking in the compliment when I saw Thomas enter, and my stomach dropped. But he wasn't alone. He was with someone I recognized as a major restaurateur, someone who owned a dozen high-end establishments across the city. Thomas saw me and, to my surprise, walked over with his companion. "Marcus," he said, extending his hand. "Congratulations. This is remarkable work." "Thank you," I managed. "This is James Martindale," he continued, introducing his companion. "He owns the Martindale Group. James, this is Marcus Chen, the designer I was telling you about." "Impressive work," Martindale said, studying one of the wall displays. "We're always looking for fresh perspectives on restaurant design. Do you have a card?" I did, thanks to another investment from Rachel's check. Proper business cards on thick stock, not the flimsy ones I'd printed at home before. As I handed it over, I caught Thomas's eye. He gave me a small nod, almost approving, before moving on to their table. Did Thomas Whitfield just help you network? Rachel appeared at my elbow, having witnessed the interaction. I think he did. Huh. She sipped her champagne thoughtfully. Maybe the divorce is making him human. Miracles do happen. The evening progressed in a whirl of conversations, compliments, and observations. I watched diners interact with the menus, saw their delight as each section revealed itself, heard the murmur of appreciation that rippled through the room. Several people asked if I did freelance work, if I could design for their restaurants, their galleries, their events. But the moment that mattered most came near the end of the evening. I was standing near the kitchen, taking a breather from the social whirlwind, when Chef Ripert emerged with someone I didn't recognize, an older woman with silver hair and an unmistakable air of authority. Marcus, I'd like you to meet Ruth Reichel, he said, and I nearly dropped my glass. Ruth Reichel, the legendary food critic, former editor of Gourmet, a voice that could make or break careers. She was holding one of my menus, running her fingers over the folds. This is extraordinary, she said simply. It understands something fundamental about dining, that anticipation is half the pleasure. May I ask about your background? I told her briefly about art school and freelancing, about the childhood that taught me to see beauty in limitation. She listened intently, occasionally nodding. You know what this reminds me of? She said finally. MFK Fisher wrote that a good meal is a celebration of civilization. Your design celebrates not just the meal, but the entire ritual of dining. It makes the implicit explicit without being heavy-handed. She handed me her card. I'm working on a new project about the intersection of food and design. I'd love to talk to you about contributing. After she walked away, I had to lean against the wall for support. Chef Ripert smiled at my expression. You've impressed the right people tonight, he said. But more importantly, you've enhanced our guests' experience. That's the real success. The evening began winding down around 10:30. I found myself back in the side room with the boxes of menus, needing a moment of quiet. That's where Rachel found me. Hiding? She asked. Processing, I said. This doesn't feel real. It's real. She picked up one of the menus, examining it with the focus she used to reserve for legal briefs. You know what I realized tonight? Watching people react to these? I waited. Success isn't about having more than other people. It's about creating something that didn't exist before, adding to the world instead of just taking from it. She set the menu down carefully. I spent so many years taking money, status, security. You spent those same years making. Look where it led us. You're being too hard on yourself, I said. No, I'm being honest. But that's okay. Honest is a good place to start again from. She smiled. Speaking of which, I have news. I'm going back to school. Law school? Art therapy. Turns out there's a whole field dedicated to helping people heal through creation. Who knew? She laughed. Well, you probably knew. You've been doing it your whole life. We were interrupted by Sylvie, who appeared with an envelope. From Chef, she said, handing it to me. Your final payment, plus a bonus. He's very pleased. I tucked it away without looking, though I could tell from the weight that it was substantial. Money mattered. Of course it did, but it wasn't why I was here anymore. The room had emptied except for staff cleaning up. Mom appeared in the doorway looking tired but radiant. Ready to go? She asked. I saved you a menu. Thought you might want one for your portfolio. We left together, the three of us, walking out into the March night. The city felt electric around us, full of possibility and promise. We decided to walk for a while despite the chill, following familiar streets that led downtown. Your father would have loved tonight, Mom said suddenly. We'd been walking in comfortable silence, but something about the evening had brought him to mind. He always said art was about connection, not isolation, that the point was to build bridges between people. I used to hate when people said I was like him, I admitted. It felt like being told I was destined to fail. You're like him in the best ways, Mom said firmly. The talent, the vision, the refusal to compromise. But you've got something he didn't, the ability to meet the world halfway, to create beauty that functions in reality, not just in dreams. We reached the subway station where we'd need to part ways. Mom and Rachel heading to Queens, me to Brooklyn. But none of us seemed ready to end the evening. Coffee? Rachel suggested. I know a place that's open late. We found an all-night diner. Harsh fluorescent lights, a stark contrast to Le Bernardin's calculated ambiance. But the coffee was hot, the pie was good, and we were together. Rachel pulled out her phone to show us listings for apartments she was considering, all in neighborhoods where artists lived, where she could rebuild herself into someone new. This one has a great light, I said, pointing to a listing in Astoria, not far from our old neighborhood. Full circle, she mused. Maybe that's what I need. My phone buzzed with emails, requests for meetings, inquiries about projects, congratulations from people I'd never met. Tomorrow I'd need to respond, to figure out how to build on tonight's success. But for now, I silenced it and focused on my family, on this moment of connection that felt more valuable than any professional triumph. A toast, Mom said, raising her coffee cup, to second chances, to finding your way back, to creating something from nothing. We clinked our thick ceramic mugs together, the sound nothing like crystal but somehow more satisfying. Outside, the city rushed past, but inside our little booth, time had slowed to something manageable. You know what I keep thinking about? Rachel said. That mural you painted on our building. How the whole neighborhood would stop to watch you work. Mrs. Rodriguez bringing you lemonade. Mr. Park letting you use his ladder. It wasn't just art, it was community. That's what tonight felt like, I said, understanding something I hadn't before. Not just showing design to critics, but creating something people could experience together. Exactly. She smiled. Maybe that's the real family talent. Not just making beautiful things, but making things that bring people together. We stayed until nearly 2 a.m., when even the diner's patient staff began to hint it was time to go. Outside, we hugged goodbye. Real embraces that held promise of more gatherings, more connections, more chances to be the family we'd almost forgotten how to be. I took the subway home, the train nearly empty at this hour. In my pocket, the envelope from Sylvie felt both heavy and light, weighted with possibility rather than paper. I thought about the emails waiting for me, the opportunities opening up, the chance to create more beauty in a world that desperately needed it. But mostly, I thought about transformation, how a piece of paper could become a crane, a flower, a menu that told a story, how a struggling artist could become a sought-after designer, how a family fractured by ambition and fear could fold back together, creating new shapes from old creases. My apartment was as I'd left it, covered in the detritus of creation, but now it looked different. Not like chaos, but like potential. I cleared a space on my desk and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. Not for a client or a project, just for the joy of folding, of seeing what shapes might emerge. The city was quiet outside my window, but I could feel its pulse, the millions of stories unfolding in parallel to mine. Somewhere, diners were still discovering hidden courses in my menus. Somewhere, Rachel was planning her new life. Somewhere, Mom was sleeping peacefully, wearing her birthday brooch, dreaming of children who'd found their way. I made the first fold, crisp and sure, then another, and another. Each fold a choice, a commitment, a small act of faith that something beautiful could emerge from simple materials and careful attention. By the time dawn began to lighten the sky, I'd created a small garden of paper flowers, each one different but related, a family of forms that belonged together despite their variations. I arranged them on my windowsill, where the morning light would find them, would reveal their shadows and subtleties. Then I finally opened Sylvie's envelope. The check was generous, more than generous, but it was the note that made me smile. For creating magic from paper. Looking forward to our next collaboration. Next collaboration. The words held promise, suggested a future where my work would continue to find audiences, where beauty and function could dance together in ever more intricate patterns. I pinned the note to my wall, next to the Coney Island photo, and the first sketch I'd made for the menu. Then I went to bed, still in my launch outfit, too tired to change, but too satisfied to care. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new emails to answer, new designs to dream up. But tonight had proven something I'd always believed but never quite trusted, that choosing beauty over security wasn't really a choice at all. They were partners, not opposites. Create enough beauty, share it generously enough, and security would follow. Not as goal, but as byproduct. Not as destination, but as companion on the journey. I fell asleep thinking about paper and possibility, about family recovered and future unfolding. In my dreams, I was back at that childhood mural, painting an ocean on brick. But this time, Rachel was beside me with her own brush, Mom was mixing colors, and even Dad was there, showing me how shadows could make the fish seem to swim. We were all creating together, transforming a plain wall into something wonderful. And in the dream, I understood that this was what success really looked like. Not standing alone at the top of something, but standing together, making beauty from whatever materials life provided, folding and refolding until the shapes finally felt right. The city hummed its morning song as I drifted deeper into sleep, and somewhere in that hum I heard the whisper of paper against paper, the sound of possibilities taking shape.